Good lighting can make photography a breeze, but do you notice how much harder it is to take good photos when the conditions are darker, whether that's on overcast days or in shadier places such as these woods? I believe that great low light photography comes down to one single factor, and that is getting the correct shutter speed. But how do we know which shutter speed to use, and are there other tools and techniques that we can use to help us? As many of you will already be aware, a fast shutter speed will allow us to freeze the action, but it will also limit the amount of light that we can let into our camera. So how fast a shutter speed can we get away with while still correctly exposing our photo? And how do we keep our images from becoming too noisy? Well, for that we need to understand a couple of things. The first is the behavior of our subject. Ideally, the behaviors that you're looking for is periods of rest in between actions. This can very much vary between the species. For example, a red squirrel will pause momentarily in between running around looking for food when it's looking around probably for the next bit of food. Whereas a wagtail, for example, even when it is paused at rest, it will still be wagging its tail. So you'll need a faster shutter speed for these animals to try and capture that motion. This means that for the wagtail, there's a shorter period of time where no motion is occurring. To put this into perspective, I was able to achieve the shutter speed as low as 1/13 of a second with the red squirrels, whereas for the wagtail, using a shutter speed of 1/100th of a second, I still struggled to keep the entire subject sharp. Now the second point to consider is aperture. Having a wide open aperture or a low f-stop number will allow you to let in more light at any one time, kind of like having a larger bucket to collect rainwater. So in low light conditions, you might want to consider using a lens such as a 70-200 2.8. If we take a look at this example, you'll see that the shot taken at f2.8 has an ISO of 1600, whereas if we were to shot this on a camera which has an f-stop of 6.3, our ISO is being pushed all the way up to 8000. This shows that the aperture of 6.3 is over 2 stops darker than the aperture of 2.8. So our camera is working much harder to compensate. The trade-off with these faster lenses is that they're often a shorter focal length, so you might need to rethink your composition unless you're fortunate enough to own a rather expensive 600 f4 lens. So how noisy our image is going to be, and what level of noise do we think is acceptable? Well, this is going to be determined by our ISO, which is essentially the sensitivity of our sensor. For full frame cameras, I would put my ISO between 100 and 12,800, whereas an APS-C camera, I would go from 100 to about 3200, possibly 6400. These are nice ballpark figures, and they will vary between the make and the model of the camera, but try these and see how you find it, and then vary from there. And if you're struggling to juggle the shutter speed, the ISO and the aperture, I would suggest using manual plus auto ISO. Essentially, this means that you're going to set the shutter speed, which we've already discussed as being the most important for creating a sharp image, the aperture, which is generally going to be wide open, and the camera will be setting the ISO. By allowing your camera to control the ISO, it will be doing calculations based on your current settings. And these calculations will allow you to get a perfect exposure every time. If you'd like to learn more about manual plus auto ISO, there will be a link down in the description that you can go and watch after this video. Now that we've covered the settings for low light photography, you might be wondering, are there any other techniques that you can use to help support these settings? For example, how do we reduce camera shake at low shutter speeds? To reduce the risk of camera shake from a low shutter speed, what you want to do is increase the stability of your camera. There are a couple of ways to do this. The first would be to use additional gear, such as a tripod, and for this I really recommend using a fluid head. It's great for panning and video, but it's also fantastic for photography. But there are other additional equipment that you could use. You could get creative using the environment around you. For example, this gate would be great because it's really sturdy. Or you could potentially try this technique where you use your legs to stabilize your camera. This also has the additional benefit of allowing you to get down to eye level, which is always crucially important within wildlife photography. The other option when it comes to stability is to use in-camera stabilization. There are generally a couple of options for this. One is within the camera itself, and the other is within the lens. Through using these stabilization techniques, you're able to get sharp shots at lower shutter speeds. Another great tip for working in low light conditions is to use a high frame rate. By taking multiple images, it increases our chance of getting a sharp shot, as we can discard all the shaky photos and just show the best ones. So I hope you've enjoyed this video. If you did, be sure to like and subscribe. It really helps the channel out, and I'll catch you in the next one.